In our final chapter, we'll look at rendering in 3ds Max, and we'll talk about the different options for renderers. First, I just want to show you, this is a version of the Loft apartment. It's got lots of lights in it, and all these cool props have been XREF'd in. And I've rendered some samples from different camera angles with different lighting setups. Let's take a look at those. These were all done with the ART Autodesk Ray Trace renderer. And because of that, they look pretty good. It's a physically accurate renderer that's pretty low maintenance. I didn't have to do a lot to set up these scenes. However, that comes at the cost of render time. Because of the complexity of these scenes, they took many hours to render. Some of them took up to 8 hours to render a single frame. Just be aware that that's what you have to work with ART currently. Let's look at our options for renderers in a stock installation of 3ds Max. We've got the Scanline renderer, the Quicksilver hardware renderer, ART or Autodesk Ray Tracer, and 2 NVIDIA plugins, iRay and Mental Ray. The Scanline renderer is the original renderer that came with 3ds Max when version 1 came out. And it's pretty fast compared to something like Mental Ray or ART. However, it's not physically accurate. You can't expect to get effects like light bouncing off of surfaces to illuminate nearby surfaces. The Scanline renderer is not really able to do that. So it's got just basic features. But if you're trying to get a non-photorealistic rendering that's got a kind of computer graphic stylized look, then the Scanline renderer is going to be your best choice. The Quicksilver hardware renderer is extremely fast. As we'll see, we can set the Quicksilver renderer to render in 1 second per frame, and it'll blast through an animation pretty quickly. It does that because it uses the GPU, or the video hardware, in order to calculate the images. It's actually the same technology as the engine that displays the viewports, which is known as Nitrous. Nitrous is the viewport version of the hardware renderer, and Quicksilver is the offline version that is able to save out files. Because it uses the GPU video hardware, the quality that you get is going to be highly dependent upon the quality of your hardware. If you've got a really good video card, then you'll have better results with Quicksilver. And because of all of that, Quicksilver is really most suited to draft quality or stylized renders. ART, or Autodesk Ray Tracer, has highly variable render times. As I mentioned, they can be very, very long render times. But if you've got a simple scene, like a single subject, then it can render pretty quickly. It is physically accurate. If you drop a light into a scene and render it with ART, what you see in that rendering is exactly what you would see in the real world. And that's a plus and a minus, because since ART is absolutely physically accurate, you cannot achieve any result that is not physically possible. In other words, if you can't do it in the real world, then you can't do it in ART. So, for example, you can't turn off shadows, and you can't exclude lights from objects. Because of all this, ART is highly suited to photorealistic renders, like we saw, and really only stills because the render times are too long for animation. NVIDIA has 2 plugins for 3ds Max. The first is iRay. It's very similar to ART in as much as it's physically accurate. However, the difference is that iRay can use the CPU, that is the main processor in your computer. It can use the GPU, or your video hardware, or both. And it does it in a way that's different to the Quicksilver hardware renderer. iRay uses something called general purpose GPU, and that means that it can use your video card to calculate arbitrary code. That means that it's not limited to the acceleration that your video card provides to, for example, draw polygons. General purpose GPU rendering means that we can render really any effect, and we're using the video card in order to do those calculations. And once again, if you have a really good video card with lots of memory, you'll have better results. The downside to iRay is that it requires certain materials. It really only works with the Mental Ray Arch and Design or the Autodesk materials, which are in fact built upon Arch and Design. If you use a standard material, for example, it won't render correctly in Iray. Finally, we come to NVIDIA Mental Ray, and it's by far the most versatile of all of these renderers. You can achieve very realistic effects, and you can also achieve very stylized effects using Mental Ray. The downside to Mental Ray, however, is that you have to invest a lot of time in setting it up. With ART, you can just drop your lights in there and then press render, and it's kind of a set it and forget it situation. But with Mental Ray, you'll probably have to do a lot more work to get your rendering to look good. Because Mental Ray is the most versatile of the renderers, it's suitable really for all applications rendering still or animated sequences. That's an overview of the 5 stock renderers available in 3ds Max 2017.